This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and thank you for joining us. This is thetruthcentral.com. You can find me on X at CorsiJerome1 and on Substack, JeromeCorsiPhD.substack.com. We have a guest today. I'm very pleased to have Brian Sussman with us. And Brian has just written a new book, great book called Climate Cult. And we're going to feature Climate Cult and explain the book. Brian and I have known each other for a long time. Brian was a meteorologist out in San Francisco. He had a podcast, radio show for years, and I was a guest on his show going back to about 2008 or 2009, in that range, back when I was writing about Barack Obama and his questionable birth certificate and his questionable life and his Marxism and all the rest. I wrote that. My bestseller in that time was Abomination, which was number one New York Times bestseller in 2008. Then I'd also done Where's the Birth Certificate, 2011, just as they produced a phony birth certificate and said this was the real one. We actually found the birth certificate from which that was copied. And Sarah Arpaio, after doing years of really forensic work on it, verified that we did find the birth certificate from which Barack Obama's was copied. So that's different than the topic we're here to discuss today. Brian, thank you for joining us.
You know, Dr. Corsi, maybe it isn't so different because you just mentioned Obama's Marxist background. And the Marxist philosophy has been driving the environmental movement going back to Frederick Engels, Karl Marx's writing partner back in the 1880s. So really they're closely aligned. But by the way, it's just an honor to be with you. We had so many great radio discussions in San Francisco over the years. So now the table's turned and I'm on your program. Thank you.
Well, that's great. And as you know, I've written a book on climate, which is the truth about energy, global warming, and climate change. And my book did quite well. I was very pleased with it. It's still doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very curious and anxious to have you explain yours. But I think we start from the same premise. So let's start here on the Marxism of the climate movement and tell us how your book adds to that discussion.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I wrote the book Climate Gate. A veteran meteorologist exposes the global warming scam, then Eco-Tyranny, how the left's green agenda will dismantle America, and now Climate Cult, exposing and defeating their war on life, liberty, and property. All that said, your book on energy and climate change and environmentalism was the most thorough book ever written on the topic. And when I saw that book, I was in the process of writing Climate Cult. I saw your book. I thought, wow, okay, I've got to start. I've got to change some things because no publisher is going to want my book. You covered it all. What can I do differently? So I think my book really does complement yours very well. But getting back to the Marxism point of view, and I know this is all within your wheelhouse. I've read just about everything that Karl Marx and Frederick Engels ever put together. And I came across a document, and it's in Climate Cult. It's a paper that was written by Engels in 1883. And, these guys, they hated capitalism. They hated industrialization. They hated free markets. They hated human progress. And so Frederick Engels actually put together a incredibly well-written paper describing what soot would do to the atmosphere. The soot from industrialization would take Earth into a ball of ice, void of all life. Plant life, animal life, human life would be vanquished, completely gone. And that was his big scare tactic to really get the environmental movement rolling. So this is in the 1880s. And then I started looking at some of these disciples of Marx that came forward. And one of his first disciples was a guy named Justus von Liebig. Justus von Liebig. I mean, he was literally taught by Marx. He came up with the first environmental crisis. He hated humankind. He hated progress. He hated capitalism, industrialization. And he said that the guano trade, so guano was being used as a fertilizer in Great Britain. and crops were growing. People were able to have more food on the table. Families were getting larger. With larger families, there were larger houses. With larger houses, that meant larger plots of land. People had more animals. People had carriages. People had all of this stuff. He was despised by how humans were living better. He called the guano trade a robbery system that was going to destroy nature. Then you had another one of Marx's disciples. This was Sir Edwin Ray Lancaster. He was another one of these environmentalists early in his time. He called humans the insurgent sons of nature. And then you can fast forward a little farther along to for example, let's talk about Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. That book still sells well to this day. I mean, she was a Marxist. She had Marxist ties. Her boyfriend was a Marxist from UC Davis. And then you go to Paul Ehrlich with the population bomb. I mean, clearly a guy with a socialist mindset. Then you look at the founders of Earth Day. All of these guys hated America and loved communism. So there's this strain, Dr. Corsi, that runs through this environmental movement.
It does. And I think also the other part of it is that they hate God. And so therefore they hate life.
Yes.
That only God can bestow. They hate human beings because we're created in the image and likeness of God.
Yes.
And they want to destroy all that. Now, why they want to destroy it is hard to comprehend. I puzzled that for years, and they just are filled with hate, and they have no positive solution. Now, it's interesting with what you're saying about the soot in the air that, the original Paul Ehrlich, when he got together with John Holdren, which was an interesting combination,
right?
Because Ehrlich, his specialty, he was a PhD, he had specialized in butterflies. He studied butterflies. I don't remember Paul Ehrlich ever writing anything. There were too many butterflies in the world. There were too many people. And then he gravitated to this Malthusian idea, which was rampant then, and it is still rampant today.
Yes.
That there's too many people, and we are the blight of the earth, and we're going to ultimately use the resources of the earth up so that those privileged few who really are entitled to the resources of the earth don't get their share. So they've got to kill us and get rid of us all. But the point is the hatred of God is fundamental. Now, the soot idea, when Ehrlich got together with Holdren was a climate, he was a nuclear scientist. He studied plasma, which is a very difficult subject in nuclear physics. And he said to Ehrlich, well, let's make it a climate, an existential threat. In other words, too many people, too much carbon dioxide, too much hydrocarbon fuels. But first they thought it was going to be global cooling.
Right. But
suddenly this was going to lead to a global cooling effect. And then, of course, the Earth did not continue to cool. It got warmer for a period of years, not enough to make a real time series analysis. And so they shifted. But if the science were right, it wouldn't have had to shift between global warming and global cooling. I mean, it's like, that's pretty drastic, are we going to burn up or are we going to freeze?
Right.
Well, either way, it's no good, they want to say, so either way, you got a problem.
Yes.
And people are the problem. So the Marxism runs all the way through it. Now, when you get this Green New Deal, which and Michael Mann, who produces this hockey puck graph saying, everything was just fine until the Industrial Revolution, then we shot up with temperatures.
Right.
He becomes a Marxist openly in his most recent book. So the Marxism runs all through this movement. Would you agree?
Yes. And I really want to emphasize what you had to say. These people are anti-God. And doesn't that make sense as well? Because when you look at the foundation of Marxism, Karl Marx put together something called the laws of matter. And if you were to boil the laws of matter down, it would be some people are born with a better brain than others. And those people with the better brain have a metaphysical right of sorts, or responsibility, I guess I should say, to rule over those with the lesser brain, because left to their own devices, those with the lesser brains will kill one another and destroy the planet. I mean, that's kind of the at the heart of Marxism, this laws of matter. But what's at the heart of the United States of America? Well, inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Marxist thinks that's absurd. And we have people in our government today who they kind of sneer at these inalienable rights. God can give anybody rights. They really believe that only the government can issue rights. And so that's at the heart of this movement as well. You're right. It's an atheist, anti-God movement designed to not allow humans to flourish, but to take the excess humans and either get rid of them or keep them under lock and key.
Right. I mean, the self-appointed privilege, which is that we're the entitled ones,
Mm-hmm.
is key to these systems. I mean, when you read all these climate movements, including AOC and all the rest of it, now they're saying, well, we can't have climate, sense, whatever that means to them, get rid of, stop using hydrocarbon fuels unless we've also got, gender freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And we have queer theory accepted, okay, because they want their whole agenda to be wrapped in this, which makes it clear that this is not any longer about the climate itself.
Right. And you touched on this, and this would be a great exchange. I'd love to get your thoughts further on this. But it's interesting how it's very difficult to explain this to just your average person on the street. You actually need to take some time to write it out and then hope that people will read it. But the whole idea that we can go from climate change to social justice, climate change to social equity, they don't seem like they're connected, but the climate agenda is able to, with tricky language, connect all those very things.
Well, this
So
one,
you're right, it's a broad movement.
this is one of the strengths of your book, is you're examining these kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And these questions are very important because what they're saying fundamentally, now this becomes, as it were, a secular religion,
Yes.
a cult. You have to get
This is
you've
the
got to get
best of Dr.
indoctrinated into
Jerome
the
Corsi
principles of
on the
cult
Truth
before
Central.
you really understand the logic of how they operate. And that's, I think, that's one of the key strengths of your book, is decoding this logic, which is really illogical.
Yeah.
But when you say, okay, so we're burning hydrocarbon fuels and we are emitting carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, as a process. Now, greenhouse gas is only a trace molecule in the atmosphere, 0.04%.
Yes.
So it's not nearly as effective as greenhouse gas as water vapor, which is about 70% of all greenhouse gases. So we're dealing with the wrong end of the equation to begin with.
Yes.
But the only reason why we're dealing with that is because hydrocarbon fuels emit carbon dioxide. Okay, now, if we say that this produces a good system, which then are unequal, not distributed according to social justice, not equally distributed, white people get more and produce more, and those who are privileged from good schools get more. And so therefore minorities get less. And if we redistributed everything, we could have less use of energy because we wouldn't be overproducing for the privileged few.
Right.
So therefore, if we get no more use of hydrocarbon fuels, we can have a better redistribution of the much less that there is to distribute. Which makes no sense at all.
It's right. Just cuckoo.
Yeah, it's just, so I got a good idea. Why don't we shoot ourselves in the foot so that we are not equally discriminating against people who are truly handicapped.
Right. Yeah. So you're bringing up some really excellent points, and the way people are so able to believe these things. Well, okay, that's why I contend this is run like a cult. they first put out these scary scenarios that draw people in. And then they point a finger at each individual saying, you are a carbon sinner. It's your lifestyle that's ruining the planet. But you can atone. You can atone by reducing your carbon footprint. They just in the San Francisco Bay Area, where of course I lived and worked for so many years. They're reviving the Oakland airport. So there's the San Francisco airport, which you've flown into before, and there's just across the bay the Oakland airport. But now they're trying to revive.
I've flown into both of them many times. Yeah.
So they're trying to revive the Oakland airport, and the way they're selling this in their television commercials and radio commercials is by flying from Oakland, you can reduce your carbon footprint. I mean, just these cockamamie things. So see, there's atonement for your carbon footprint. But then they promise this great utopia, as we mentioned, where there's going to be no social injustice and there's going to be social equity for all. So it has all the underpinnings of a cult. But I mentioned this, Dr. Corsi, because it's just like, when you wrote your books on Obama. Obama was like a cult. The way they were so easily able to get people, I should say, behind this guy. The hysteria over COVID was run like a cult. So they've learned how to tap in to the heartbeat of so many uninformed people and really stretch these things out.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, yes, and it is a cult in that regard. My book on Obama was Abomination, and subtitle was The Cult of Personality.
Yes, so I forgot about the subtitle. Right.
The Cult of Personality, and I was really focused on that this was a cult in terms of, okay, now. It's interesting. I was reading yesterday, just one of my favorite books I published maybe in the 70s called How Real is Real. And they were talking, it's a book on social psychology. And they were talking about in Seattle, under the Eisenhower administration, when there was still nuclear testing being done in the atmosphere, and in Seattle, new highways were being built. And there got to be people were saying, well, my car windshield is getting pocked. Getting all these pock marks in my windshield from the radiation and the cement. And so there were reports all over the place. All the people were reporting their car windshields were being destroyed. Well, the President Eisenhower actually sent out a task force to study this. And what they found was that the windshields were not getting pocked. What the windshields were suffering normal road outside surface scarring from just being driven.
Right.
But this phenomenon was not going on. But because people had the idea that it was going on, more and more people were saying, well, I've witnessed that. Right. There's a problem with my windshield. And so the whole city was going on to this bizarre idea. Now, once you do the same with carbon dioxide, and you say, well, our carbon footprint, there's something wrong with carbon.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of our bodies are carbon.
Right. It's the backbone of life.
Without carbon, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
And carbon dioxide is plant food. So it is greener. And the earth is warmer today than it was during an ice age. But 600 million years ago, we had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we had today.
Right.
We've had ice ages because of the Milankovitch cycles. Our orbit around the sun is not circular, it's elliptical. And when it gets more elliptical, we're farther away, we're likely to have an ice age. Now, these are all scientific principles, but they're not taught in schools.
No. Well, it reminds me of that saying by Karl Marx, history means nothing. They want to destroy history. They don't want you to know your history. And that includes the history of the Earth's atmosphere and climate. But I also like what you were saying regarding, that trace amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, 0.04%. And you look at what percentage of that is actually generated by humankind through the use of fossil fuels primarily. It's 4% of the 0.04%. That's an infinitesimal, you can't even measure that. That's so small. It's hard to wrap your brain around that. But they don't want you to know that, so just a common observer would say, wait a second, the tail's wagging the dog here. How could CO2 be such a dangerous component of the atmosphere one of the guys who endorsed my book, and you know of him, Dr. Neil Frank, former director of
Yes.
the National Hurricane Center. And he had mentioned to me in a private in a conversation that didn't make it into the book, but I have other instances of this fact present in the book. If we drop below 200, right now we're about 420 parts per million in terms of CO2, very small amount. And again, of that, only 4% is generated by humankind. But if we were ever to get down below 280 parts per million, plant life would start dying.
Right.
We need more CO2.
Right.
And as you mentioned, in past eras, CO2 has clearly, through geological evidence, been higher than it is today.
Well, and your book is strong in saying that you can't refute these people with facts.
No.
Facts mean nothing.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, well, your facts are racist. Your facts
Right.
are, because, well, you're a white person, so your facts are racist.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want your facts.
Right.
We want our facts. Okay, it's not a fact-driven argument. It's a postmodernist. We can posit the truth that we want.
Mm-hmm.
We can posit that a world without hydrocarbon fuels is going to be a cleaner Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, you can't posit that. I mean, for instance, okay, let's take another point. Scientifically, if we increase X amount, we exude in the atmosphere X amount of carbon dioxide more,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean there's going to be X amount more of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Right.
Because it's not a linear process.
Right.
It may have another thing that kicks in and takes out some of that. More plants grow.
Sure.
Okay. And so the more plants exude oxygen, which is good for us.
Yes.
But again, since we exhale carbon dioxide, you can say this is the Anthropocene. In other words, human beings are going to be the cause of our own extinction because we are exhaling. And we should, if we're going to kill cows because they produce methane and farting, we should kill human beings because they exhale carbon dioxide.
Right.
So we're going to save the planet by killing human beings.
Right. And yeah, see, these are the mental gyrations that take place in order to sell this thing. And when you have an uninformed, populace, it's easier to pull this stuff off. I mean, all of your books kind of touch on this mindset, but so it is in Climate Cult as well. So what do they have planned for us? They say that we're going to have a carbon neutral energy grid.
Right.
And it's interesting because you may have had this in your book. I certainly touched on it in mine, but Princeton University seems to be the go-to for this carbon neutral
This
grid.
is the best of Dr.
Princeton
Jerome Corsi
University says,
on the
okay,
Truth
we
Central.
finally get to the place where it's all solar and all wind. We'll need a wind turbine field that's 250 million acres. So I did the math on this. That's Nebraska, that's Missouri, that's Kansas, that's Illinois, Kentucky, and half of Indiana. That would all be wind turbines.
Right. And half of it wouldn't work.
Right. And so then at MIT, the geniuses at MIT who are all in on this as well, they said, well, we'll certainly have to have a battery backup. Okay, great. We're going to have a battery backup for this wind and solar outfit. So right now, their estimate for this battery backup, which they say could last 12 hours if it works, is going to cost a mere $2.3 trillion, Dr. Corsi.
Right.
These people are mad.
Well, and they want to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bury it in the earth. These big carbon capture factories.
Right.
It's sublimate the carbon dioxide into the earth.
Right.
Well, is it going to stay there? I don't know. It's this ridiculous idea. And then you can have carbon taxes so that if you want to emit more carbon dioxide, you buy a credit from someone who is emitting less.
Right.
And so they have a tax scheme. Now, the idea of taxing the air we breathe has been something the left has wanted to be doing forever. They can just tax everything. attacks even the air we breathe.
Yes.
Okay, now it makes no sense at all because, again, scientifically, carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere follow warming. They don't precede warming.
Right.
They don't cause warming.
Yes.
And the forces, I typically I find ridicule the best way to deal with these people. I say things like, that big yellow thing up there in the sky is not a tree ornament. It's not. It's the sun, and it's the main source of light and heat on Earth. We know that because the Earth rotates. Another hard concept for the left concept. And then when we're on the other side, from the sun, it's dark. We call that night. Okay, it doesn't mean the sun's gone. It's coming back. It's wait a while. Okay, and then when we rotate around, now if we didn't have carbon dioxide, if we didn't have greenhouse gases, when the sun is gone, a lot of the irradiation from the daytime would escape back up into the atmosphere. So the greenhouse gases are not noxious. They're not harmful. We exhale carbon dioxide. It's not killing us.
Right. Right. Well, there's that wonderful organization that I know you're aware of, the CO2 Coalition, and you look at some of the heavy hitters on this list of scientists. They include the 2022 winner in physics, John Clauser. John Clauser, again, physics professor, Nobel Prize, and he says, no, we need more CO2, not less. And John Clauser is an interesting case in point, as are so many others on this coalition. And, we have other petitions like the Oregon petition, which I think has seen over 30,000 scientists sign on to it. And Climate Intelligence, another group of heavy hitters, thousands of people have signed on saying they don't buy this theory of global warming or climate change. But you look at so many of these people, when they finally did a deep dive, like John Clauser did this, he did a deep dive into the temperature record. He said, I want to see what's going on with this global warming thing. Dr. Neil Frank did the same thing in the 90s. He said, I've got access to all the records. I want to see what's happening with this global warming deal. And they all go through the records, and I've been able to do this as well as a meteorologist, but not to the level they have. They get access to more stuff than I can, that I've been able to. But you look, and the temperature record of the Earth has been so mismanaged. And there are so many estimates that go into that climate record. And this is what John Clauser was saying. He said, in the world of physics, we don't do estimates. We can't estimate the amount of cloud cover in the sky when we put together these climate models. We can't estimate the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere when we put together climate models. We need to know specifically. But again, the public doesn't know this. So much of what's going into these models that spell gloom and doom it's estimation. Well, and therefore there's an opportunity for bias.
That's exactly right. And Judith Curry is was one of the big global warming believers.
Brilliant
She's recently changed her position, and largely seeing how Michael Mann faked the data.
Yes.
Turned her around, because she now understands and is writing effectively that you can't model the climate because the mathematics are not linear.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got nonlinear mathematics, which again, people are not taught to understand what it means.
Right.
The equations don't always end up with the same solutions. That's hard to understand, but you try to solve certain sets of differential equations that are almost unsolvable.
Yeah.
Or they have so many solutions that it's almost meaningless.
Yes.
Okay. So therefore, the probability of an outcome coming from these factors, that if you could measure them precisely, and we can't measure them precisely. So small differences in measurement make a big difference in outcome.
Yes.
But we're measuring things with mathematics that are, for instance, pi has an infinite number of decimals. It is not a discrete number, so therefore it's not measurable. And so how many decimals do you take when you want to say, how warm is it today?
Right.
If you could measure that, how many measurement points would you have to have on the Earth to say, what's the temperature of the Earth right now?
Right.
Well, there isn't one temperature of the Earth right now. because half of the world is dark. It's night. All kinds of variations.
Sure.
And the complexity of this is enormous, and it cannot be modeled because we don't have the mathematics that permit it to be modeled. You, as a meteorologist, is it going to rain tomorrow? You don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you're going to be right on that general forecast probably 80% of the time. But now let's take it 2 days out, or 3 days out, and 4 days out, and your accuracy starts to plummet. And that's just for the TV weather guy. Yeah, it's true.
Well, the best idea of what it's going to do tomorrow is what it's doing today, and that's not very reliable.
Right. Yeah.
Tomorrow, and so therefore, this prediction, which is inherent in the cult, they're certain.
Yeah.
Okay, so it goes back to psychological. So now another thing psychologically, let's say we say that Hurricane Sandy comes through, or any hurricane comes through and does a lot of damage, and it demands a news cycle. We say we're getting an awfully lot of these.
Yeah.
We're getting more of these than we've ever had before.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so now you're into climate porn. Here's another big hurricane.
Okay. Who gets the title for that next book? You or me?
I like that one. It's probably a good idea. Climate porn.
But okay, you're right though. With the climate porn, I'm the next time I say it, it's as Dr. Jerome Corsi told me, and then after that I'll say, as a guy once told me, and then the third time I'll say, as I've been saying forever, climate porn. But to your point, okay, so this is what we're getting right now. I mean, we had that rash of tornadoes a couple weeks ago. And right off the bat, they're saying, well, these are bigger tornadoes, more tornadoes than ever. But that defies history as well. I mean, the worst tornado in human history, I believe, was 1931, the Tri-State tornado. It lasted many hours. It tore through 219 miles. It killed hundreds and hundreds of people in the Midwest. So tornadoes have always been. And by the way, tornadoes are so small, they couldn't be computed into any climate models. They're tiny creatures. So more tornadoes this summer. You're going to hear about heat waves. Oh God, it's more heat waves than ever. It's got to be climate change, and on and on and on. It's the climate porn. It's exactly what they do.
And people believe it because they've heard it, and they begin, just like our windshields out in Seattle are getting pockmarked because the Russians are detonating nuclear weapons in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And we're getting the fallout.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get a completely irrational set of beliefs. And okay, so more people are dying from hurricane. Well, of course they are. People are building more in hurricane alleys.
Absolutely.
We have development of seacoasts.
Yes.
We have a bigger population. Florida is a lot more populated today than it was in the 1950s.
Right.
So more people are going to die. A hurricane comes through that's a bad one. And when a bad hurricane comes through, you may not have a structure that's going to be able to resist the forces in nature.
Right.
These forces are enormous, but they're natural. They're natural. They're the Earth's way. So when these climate cultists, and you cannot rationally argue these things with them.
No. Okay. Forest fires are another one, or wildfires. We'll see massive forest fires this summer, probably most of them induced by lightning. But why do we see more of and they have a new term for this now, as you know, it's called flash fires. We have flash floods, flash fires. Well, the reason why the fires are going out of control is because of this environmental mentality of preservation. God, okay, let's get back to God. God in the book of Genesis says, be a steward of the earth. Take care of the earth. Well, I think as a real conservationist, I want to take care of the earth. I want to manage the forest properly. But they believe in this preservation mentality. Just let them grow, let them go, and let them grow. So our national forests and many of our state forests have just grown completely out of control. They're tinderboxes now. I've been able to observe this in my own lifetime, just hiking in the high Sierra, places where I used to be able to hike unabated to climb to the top of a mountain. You can no longer do that. It's just filled with brush and all sorts of invasive species. that should have been cleared out a long time ago, but it's a tinderbox waiting to happen. And as such, I know this throughout the Western United States. I can't say what's happening back east, but fire insurance rates have gone through the roof because of this now.
That's right. The only thing I mean, and I think to attack a cult, and in your book again is very good on how do we attack a cult. So you can't argue it with facts.
Right.
But for most people, one of the key, all the ideas produced by this cult don't work. They're all bizarre. Okay, so electric cars, okay, electric vehicles. Sure, the original cars were electric vehicles. Why don't we have electric vehicles today? Well, because internal combustion engines were more efficient. Okay, now, if in winter in Chicago, we had a bad winter, people could not recharge their cars in the open because the batteries don't charge when they get cold. Okay. We don't have enough charging stations. In fact, all this money that Biden passed in this environmental bill, that the reduction, deficit reduction, we do all these wonderful things, none of which we've done. Well, we haven't built very many chargers either. And the chargers, you go to a charging station and some of the chargers don't work.
Right.
Or there's other people there and you're in a long line.
Long lines.
Well, you better turn your car off because it may run out of battery and you won't be able to move it. It goes on and on and on.
Yes.
I mean, the wind turbines, well, they kill birds and they tend to burn up.
Mm-hmm.
And they turn to wear out. Well, so we got a lot of wind turbine junk and got a lot of solar junk. So we have a solar farm and it gets a hailstorm. What happens to the solar panels? Well, they probably aren't going to work very well after they've been hit by hail.
Right.
and where do we get the batteries? Well, we had to use hydrocarbon fuels to get the rare earth minerals. So I thought this was net zero.
Yeah. You're not supposed to say that. Right.
Okay. So again, the difficulty is, and I think your book hits it right on target, is that we're not dealing with rational people here.
No.
We're dealing with people who have been made to feel, and they've internalized it, that their future is waste. They're going to die because we produce too many Chevrolets and plants.
Right. So I ask you this. I certainly have my feelings. My feelings, I'm sure, are aligned well with yours. I think at the end of the day, this is really all about control. They just want to control our lives. They so despise humanity. They're all for their little clique, the elite class. But I think this is designed to just limit our energy availability and therefore control the way in which we all live. I mean, think about this, Dr. Corsi. People around in America now are getting used to rolling blackouts. Well, they just happen from time to time. That's incredible. They should never happen. People are used to water shortages. That's insane. It's a management issue. There's enough water to take care of all of our needs abundantly so. So I sense this as just a method of eventual, control.
Well, at the heart, just like it's Marxist at the heart, it's also depopulation. It's Malthusian at heart.
Yes.
And it's dark. It's anti-human.
Yes.
It's a death cult. And it's full, let's use less efficient energy. Okay, well, that's a good idea. Let's use less efficient energy. Let's teach our children less, they'll be smarter. These are things that just are inherently irrational.
Yeah.
We can't have, fertilizers that are based on nitrogen. So therefore, how are we going to feed all these people? Well, we don't plan to feed all these people. We're going to let them starve?
Right.
Well, there's too many of them. They have to be weeded out. Okay, so they never want to weed themselves out. It's just like I said, Paul Ehrlich never saw too many butterflies that he complained about. he also didn't say that there are too many environmentalists, crackpot environmentalists that have to be weeded out.
Right.
Or that we need to start teaching science in the schools again so people don't get bewitched by these bizarre ideas.
Yes.
But then, you get to the point not only where you've got this psychological process going on where it's easier for people to believe a lie and think it through because they can find, well, we've now got a demonization. It's not the Jews, it's carbon dioxide.
Right.
The carbon dioxide is the Jews of the atmosphere. So we got to make sure we get rid of it. Okay. It's about as insane as that.
Yeah.
And so therefore, why would you want to get rid of carbon dioxide? I mean, it's greener here now. Would you want to live in an ice age? I mean, are you serious? Do you know what an ice age is really like? I mean, I'm living in New Jersey. I've got a big boulder here by the hill right where we live within walking distance. That boulder was moved here by a glacier thousands of years ago. It didn't just, it's just sitting in the field. Well, how'd it get there?
Yeah, it didn't just grow there.
It didn't grow there. There's no other boulders like it around anywhere else, except for a few more that were brought. When the glaciers melted, the boulders stayed where they were.
Yeah.
Why do we have the Great Lakes? Well, they were dug out by the glaciers. Well, we don't see the glaciers anymore. Well, it doesn't mean they didn't happen.
Right. Yeah. But again, history means nothing.
No.
They don't want to hear that. I think one thing I talk about in the book, and I know you're quite familiar with this subject, is the whole idea of geoengineering or solar geoengineering. I just find it amazing how these people are spending hundreds of millions of dollars at universities all over the world studying, especially solar geoengineering, where we're going to go into the stratosphere and start creating essentially weather where there currently is no weather. They don't think that's going to have some kind of side effect that might affect them as well. That's the part of the equation that's just a disconnect for me. And the other thing that I don't believe, they all contend that they're just studying this theoretically with models and whiteboards, etc. But we would never test this. We would never do anything in the stratosphere to actually test our theories. I find that hard to believe as well. Well, they never admit to doing any of that.
Their big schemes are, let's put something in the atmosphere to block the sun. Now, that's a good idea. Let's block the major source of light and heat on Earth. Let's block it. Well, if it weren't for the sun, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
If we didn't have photosynthesis, and carbon dioxide is fundamental to photosynthesis in plants, we wouldn't be here. So you can't eliminate the sun and you can't eliminate carbon dioxide. And yet if we put on a crazy outfit and we paint ourselves up with face paint, and we get signs and we go out hysterically and start screaming at people, we can say that you're destroying the planet. We want to save the planet. Well, of course, everybody wants to save the planet. Now, the idea that human beings can save the planet must to the planet seem kind of ridiculous, because the planet's experienced 5 major extinctions before we even got here. And so we're just the latest creatures walking around on the surface of this joint. And the sun's been here and the planet's been here. And they're just waiting for us to be gone, like all the rest of them that were here to be gone. It's not a permanent place. And it also is a place that's subject to very cataclysmic action. So a big asteroid comes through and it participates in killing all the dinosaurs because it throws a tidal wave up from the Yucatan into what's today Montana. And everything along the way is all killed. You can see it in the strata.
Yes. Okay.
Well, people don't, it took the Alvarezes to figure out that this uridium, which is thrown off by earthquakes and the other kind of phenomenon thrown off by comets hitting, it can be found around the world. But the Earth repairs the damage of not like the moon where there's no atmosphere and you see all the craters. Well, we've been hit too. And we're going to be hit again. It's not a stable place. But these climate things, the only thing that's varied in Earth is industrial activity from human beings. 4.6 billion years of Earth history, or 4.5, however many billion years, industrial activity is like less than a microsecond.
Right. Correct.
And yet everything that all we're suffering is attributed to that microsecond. Well, that's ridiculous. Now, maybe we had a nuclear war and we blew up the entire planet, that microsecond could be significant. But putting a little more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is a non-event. And people just don't comprehend the scale of time or the scale of power or energy or events. So what your book focuses on, and this is where the attention needs to be, is that this is a cult. It's a crazed idea. And if people can understand that, it's not going to be so seductive.
Yeah, and how do we get people out of this cult? I really make a plea at the end of the book. The younger millennials and Gen X and Gen Z, these are incredibly liberal people by nature because of the indoctrination they've been exposed to beginning in kindergarten. But they're also very compassionate. And I'm making a plea to that compassionate part of their being that we need some common sense and just to take a step back and look at the big picture. But I'm reminded of something, and I talk about this in the afterword. You know, America was at a crossroads prior to the American Revolution. And there was a spark, there was a light, there was an awakening that took place. And it was a spiritual awakening. And it took place through the sermons of people like Jonathan Edwards. Suddenly there was this great revival, this great awakening that happened in North America. And a lot of people became filled with the Spirit of God. And they started seeing the world a little differently. And they really believed in their heart that we need freedom. We want freedom. We want religious freedom. We want, as John Locke talked about, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We want these three principles to guide us. We don't need a king. We need to separate ourselves. And so they went out and fought the biggest military in the history of the world at that time, and they won. So my point, Dr. Corsi, is we desperately need an awakening in this country. And it's my prayer every day that the Spirit of our Lord will just make himself known to people throughout this great United States of America, and that hearts and minds will be changed so that we can see the truth and realize that, yes, this is a cult, and the whole idea is oppressing us and taking away those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I will say one more thing. This past weekend, I have a Bible study that I facilitate every Saturday morning with guys from all over the world. And because of what's going on in America right now, this divisiveness, I asked two guys to pray for us here in America. One was from Nigeria, and one was from Bulgaria. And their prayers were so profound. They were so grateful to the United States. The guy from Bulgaria, because the United States helped break the shackles of the Soviet Union that allowed him to become free. He so appreciates America. The guys in Nigeria, their country's a hellhole right now. But nonetheless, they are grateful to America because half of their brethren in the state of Nigeria are Christians. And that Christianity was spread to Nigeria, to the African continent from America. So I want to believe, and I know you're an upbeat guy, and you're positive about these things too, and you have your faith in Christ, and you've told me about that in our radio shows in the past. I want to believe the best for this nation, but I think that can only come about with a spiritual awakening.
Well, I agree with you. I think that's exactly right. And the thing about human beings is that, we get it right for a minute or two, and then suddenly after that, we're like a duck that's been hit in the head by a board. From there on, we can't think anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when they get it right for a few minutes, we ought to be thankful for that. Now, there ought to be a time in human history when we get it right, and we really get it right. But that's going to have not only a revival, but it's going to have to go back to fundamental institutions. We're going to have to get families to stay together.
Yes.
We're going to have to start teaching the fundamental principles of the Bible and teaching a moral education. Now, these things are not, I mean, even if you go to pre-Christian and you read, Plato the Laws, or you read Aristotle the Politics, these are principles that have been understood since ancient times, that human beings need these structures in order to function. And when the structures start breaking down, then the thinking gets bizarre and the country begins to deteriorate. So now, once we have family breakups, we have all of the social division, we've got all kinds of issues going on that have been carefully architected. So the climate cult is a very carefully crafted mind virus that's intended to destroy. And there is nothing being suggested to replace it, except for a very small group to be in charge of everything and censor anybody who disagrees with them. And go irrational. The irrationality, the orange man bad. No matter what Donald Trump does, he's evil. We have to hate Donald Trump. Well, why? What this guy do? I mean, he hired black people, and when he hired all kinds of minorities when he was doing real estate in New York. Spend time with the workers. I mean, why do we hate him so much? Well, we hate him so much because he's no longer part of the Metropolitan Museum Gala leftist coalition in the Upper East Side. He's dared to challenge some of the principles of socialism and communism. Well, that's not permitted. Not if you want to be members of this club. So again, the ability of human beings to maintain a true thought, to live a virtuous life, requires a commitment to do so. And it requires a moral decision to be made that, again, unless you're preparing and educating children to come to that point when they're capable, they're subject to all this demonic lies and nonsense, which is fundamentally, well, you don't have to pay attention to mom and dad. You know better than mom and dad. You don't have to pay attention to them. And so it's fundamental in human nature. And I've spent a lot of time reading and thinking about it. It's fascinating to read some of the social psychology and to see, all the things that have been known and studied over the years about human behavior. And they're not too flattering for human beings. The Milgram study, where people will apply pain to each other if they're instructed to do so. It's not a very bright idea of what human beings are capable of doing. And so the cult nature of this, which your book exposes, I think is fundamental to breaking through this climate nonsense and lies. And I'm very pleased you wrote this book.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. While we need this awakening at so many levels, we need to rebuild these fundamental institutions of our society, because they've been broken down so well by the left. They're so patient with their plans, aren't they? And I don't know how many years we have left, Dr. Corsi, if we don't turn this ship around. I'm sure you've given some thought to that, but the clock is ticking. Everyone needs to take part of this, to get informed, become equipped, and then be willing to speak out. If your church decides that they're going to be involved in climate justice, you need to get informed and speak out. When your school's teaching this, that, or the other, it's your school, speak out. And I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yes, and your books on climate are very readable. And so people are going to be able to be entertained and think through these issues in a way where you're guiding them along opening their eyes to various issues. And so I think all of your books are very important. I'm very pleased this one's out. Now, let's tell people, let's name the three of your books now on climate, what their titles are.
Climate Gate, which exposed the whole Climate Gate email scandal. Climate Gate, a veteran meteorologist exposes the global warming scam. And that veteran meteorologist portion, that came from my work. I was on the CBS station in San Francisco for years, but I also worked for CBS in New York. I was their regular fill-in guy for years on the CBS Morning News and the CBS This Morning show. And just an interesting story there, Dr. Corsi. I got to know Dan Rather a bit. Dan Rather approached me and he said, I want you to be our West Coast weather correspondent. Anything that goes down on the West Coast, you're on the CBS Evening News. This was probably like 95 or something when he approached me. And he said, and by the way, with all this talk of global warming, I think you'd be the perfect guy to talk to us about it. Now, I was skeptical of global warming in 1995. I wasn't a denier like I am today, but I was skeptical. And I said, well, Dan, the jury's still out on global warming, but I'd love to talk about this. When I said the jury's still out, and this again was about 1995, he looked at me, did not even respond, turned and walked away. And I never worked on the CBS Morning News or CBS This Morning ever again after that. So that's the veteran meteorologist who wrote Climate Gate. Then there was Eco-Tyranny, and I was inspired to write Eco-Tyranny from some of your books. Eco-Tyranny, exposing and defeating their war on life. Eco-Tyranny. I need to know how the left's green agenda will dismantle America. True inspiration from you on many of our conversations on the radio when I wrote that. And then Climate Called, exposing and defeating their war on life, liberty, and property.
Well, if these are, we have to make a combined effort to get these messages across. No one book is going to do it. No one speech. It's a matter of testing people and saying, look, these ideas don't work. These ideas are bad science. These ideas are occult. They're not climate science. These are important concepts. And it's going to take years to beat this, but these are, the various formations of it. Desmet calls it mass formation. It's also kind of like a group hypnosis, or the madness of crowds. Another one from McKay was a great book on that. And it's kind of like you wonder, why did people get in their minds that women were witches and burn them at the stake? That seems like a fairly crazy idea. But yet it was very popular for a long time.
Yes.
And, that's, again, I think some of the problems that we've got in terms of a constant reinforcing of the themes and coming back to it. And I commend you for writing this book. I commend all three of your books. I recommend all three of them. I think I have your previous two books in my collection. Now I'm adding this third. And I've got a large collection of books on climate, and I value yours. Where can people reach you, Brian?
There is the Brian Sussman Show podcast. You can also, to reach out to me, if you'd like to contact me via email, just go to briansussman.com. Brian with an I, Sussman, Sussman, briansussman.com. And there's a contact button, and I respond to my emails. So I look forward to hearing from your listeners and your viewers. And I, Dr. Corsi, I really appreciate you. I appreciate all of your hard work, your tireless effort. You are an absolute writing machine. I don't know how you do the research you do, but I've always been encouraged by your books, and I've really been inspired by your dedication to, these various themes.
Well, it's I plan to continue, and I
Good.
plan to work with others like yourself who we will win this battle. I always say in the end, God always wins. God will win here too.
Good.
And as long as I'm around to continue, I plan to keep going.
Right on. Right on. We need you.
And well, we need you too, Brian. And thank you for writing this book. And I look forward to reading this book in more detail.
Good.
And we'll recommend it on a show to others.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. And we'll wrap up today. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. This is thetruthcentral.com. Thank you for joining us in this interview with Brian Sussman and his new book on climate cult. Please get a copy. And we will be back tomorrow. God bless. Thank you.